We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast, everyone. This is Abe, your host. It is 6 a.m. Sunday, February 20th. Y'all probably haven't heard much from me, but I ain't gonna lie, man, I was bummed out for a while. I had to take several days off because of dental issues. Just have a tooth going bad and just literally so painful that I literally was just laying around holding my face in excruciating pain. Then I had a strike on YouTube, which is always fun. So yeah, it kind of bummed me out, took the wind out of my sail for a while, and I ain't gonna lie, I hadn't been wanting to podcast for a while after that. But I don't know, today I felt like getting behind the mic again and picking myself back up by the bootstraps and getting back into the show. Today was a pretty chill day at work. Busy as usual, double truck. Another reason you haven't heard from me in a while was me and Sammy went out for Valentine's Day. And I take holidays off. We went to Evan Williams Distillery, so that was fun. Did a little tour and a taste testing. We almost ran out of gas on the way home because both of us forgot to fill up. So that was exciting. Went out to eat, and we went to Cheddar's in Danville, Kentucky. I had coconut shrimp, which was excellent. Comes with this like sweet sauce too. But yeah, we just honestly just had a good time. I've been chilling here at the house. Landlord's got a walkthrough tomorrow, so that'll be fun. My wife, she's basically going to clean all day today. But, yeah, that's about it as far as updates. Sorry I haven't been in the game for so long. It's just like I said, man, it bums me out getting strikes. And I don't know. I mean, I don't really make much off this channel. I put a lot of energy into this. I put a lot of just my umph, my chi into this, and then it gets discouraging sometimes and bums me out. But we'll get on with the show. Now today we are covering the Serpent Mound, and this is somewhere that I've actually been. I made a video about it on my old channel, which is just Abe Williams on YouTube. The profile picture is a sideways dream catcher. If you can find it, there's over 500 videos on there, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called. But it's in Ohio. If you guys ever get the chance to go, it's very spiritual. A lot of people compare it to like almost like a pilgrimage. I definitely felt like there was something spiritual there. I don't know, like there was at one point like a butterfly landed on me, which is like, to me, it was kind of amazing because I've never had that happen. Normally butterflies are like scared and terrified. But I don't know. I just wanted to cover it because it's somewhere I've been. It was built by the Native Americans, and I don't know, it just seemed like a cool topic to cover, so we'll get into it. The Serpent Mound. Among all the monuments, curious, vast, and inexplicable, left by the mound builders, the Serpent Mound is the most mysterious and awe-inspiring. It is located in Bratton Township, northern part of Adams County. The country there presents a region of hill, dale, plain, and stream of harmonious variety and most pleasing beauty. In the upper part of this county, there rises a picturesque and meandering little river known as Brush Creek. This creek is created by the confluence of tributary streams, the chief ones being called the East Fork, the Middle Fork, and the West Fork. The East and the West Forks, flowing from the directions indicated in their names, unite a short distance north of the mound. The Middle Fork originates in Highland County and flowing south empties into East Fork just above its juncture with the West Fork. The meeting of these three prongs of the river fork that forms Brush Creek can be easily seen from the mound bluff. Along the east side of the Brush Creek, which flows directly south into the Ohio, beginning almost imperceptibly a mile or more below the East and West Fork Junction. And running parallel with the creek is a hilly elevation of land, the summit of which forms a long stretch of plateau. This table plain, its sloping sides rising higher and higher, suddenly terminates at its northern end in a sharp, jutting bluff with an almost perpendicular cliff wall, averaging 100 feet high on the west, where it overhangs Brush Creek, whose waters wash its base. This bluff surmounts on the north and for a slight distance on the east a steep, deep ravine forming the bed of a rivulet which for want of a definite name we designate Small Run. The north and east banks of Small Run recede gradually to a height much lower than the elevated peak just described, so that the narrow neck or ridge spur thus carved out of the hillside towers boldly and abruptly in full view from the deep level below. The bluff is crowned with immense protruding rocks that, like a brow of rugged furrows, frown defiantly at the pretty hills peacefully skirting the horizon far beyond the intervening plain. Upon the crest of this high ridge lies in graceful and gigantic undulations the great Serpent. The high summit upon which the serpent appears to wind his way is crescent-shaped, its concave side being on the west wall, against the Brush Creek Valley. This tabletop is moreover highest at its southern-eastern section, where it starts from the plateau or broad hill summit, whence it pitches gently downward to its western edge and its projecting north end. This tipped surface enabled his creators and promoters to so place the wonderful serpent upon the shelving bed that he would easily be seen in all his majestic length and snake splendor from far and near on the plains below. For exhibition purposes, no finer opportunity from a natural combination of features could have been found in the Ohio Valley, and perhaps not in the Mississippi Basin. Here was a superb incline stage, elevated before a spacious hill-surrounded pit, miles in circumference, and affording ample accommodations for audiences of untold numbers. The serpent, beginning from his tip end, starts in a triple coil of the tail on the most marked elevation of the ridge and extends along down the lowering crest in beautiful folds, curving gracefully to right and left, swerving deftly over a depression in the center of his path, and winding in easy and natural convolutions down the narrowing ledge with head and neck stretched out serpent-like and pointed to the west. The head is apparently turned upon its right side, with the great mouth wide open. The extremities of the jaws, the upper or northern lying one being the longer, united by a concave bank immediately in front of which is a large oval or egg-shaped hollow 86 feet long and 30 feet wide, at its greatest inside traverse, formed by the artificial embankment from 2 or 3 feet high and about 20 feet wide at its base. The oval is therefore 120 feet long, outside measurement, and 60 feet in its greatest width. The head of the serpent across the point of the union of the jaws is 30 feet wide, the jaws in the connecting crescent 5 feet high. The entire length of the serpent, following the convolutions, is 1,335 feet. Its width at its largest portion of the body is 20 feet. At the tail, the width is no more than 4 or 5 feet. Here the height is from 3 to 4 feet, which increases towards the center of the body to a height of 5 to 6 feet. The airline distance from the north to side oval and head to the southern coil of the tail is about 500 feet. The total length of the entire work, if extended in full length from west end to the oval to the tip of the tail, is 1,415 feet. Such is the size of the enormous earthen reptile, as it has lain basking in the suns or shivering in the snows of many centuries. The effect of the sight of it produces, from close inspection or distant view, can scarcely be imagined or described. Professor F. W. Putnam of the Peabody Museum, and to whom is due the credit of the restoration and preservation of the mound, says in the account of his first visit, "The graceful curves throughout the whole length of this singular effigy give it a strange lifelike appearance, as if a huge serpent, slowly uncoiling itself and creeping silently and stealthily along the crest of the hill, was about to seize the oval within its extended jaws. Late in the afternoon, when the lights and shades are brought out in strong relief, the effect is indeed strange and weird, and this effect is heightened still more when the full moon lights up the scene, and the stillness is broken by the woo, woo, hoo, hoo of the unseen bird of night, reclining on one of the huge folds of this gigantic serpent. As the last rays of the sun gleaming from the distant hilltops cast their long shadows over the valley, I mused on the probabilities of the past, and there seemed to come to me a picture of a distant time, of a people with strange customs, and with it came the demand for an interpretation of this mystery. The unknown must become known. Professor W. H. Holmes of the Smithsonian Institution was equally impressed with the mystery of this curious creature of singular art. Mr. Holmes states, "The topography of the outer end of this promontory is somewhat peculiar. The extreme point is about 30 feet beyond the end of the artificial embankment, and is slightly cleft in the middle. The right-hand portion has no exposure of rock and descends in a narrow, rounded spur. The left hand is a naked shelf of a rock a little to the left of the direct continuation of the earthwork, and some 10 feet below its terminal point. It is rounded at the margin and perhaps 25 feet wide. The vertical outline is curved and presents a number of connecting ledges, marking the thickness of the finer strata. The entire exposure of rock at this point is perhaps 40 feet in height. Beneath this, a talus supporting slope extends to the creek bottom. From this point, the exposure of rock extends back along down the creek, descending slightly and soon disappearing from the bank of the creek. One has a comprehensive view of the Serpent Ridge. Having the idea of a great serpent in mind, one is struck with the remarkable contour of the bluff and especially of the exposure of the rock, which readily assumes the appearance of the reptile lifting its front from the bed of the stream. The head is the point of the rock, the dark, lip-like edge is the muzzle. The light-colored underside is the white neck. The caves are the eyes, and the projecting masses to the right are the protruding coils of the body. The varying effects of light must greatly increase the vividness of the impression, and nothing would be more natural than the sylvan prophet should at once regard the promontory as a great Manito, or spiritual being. His people could be led to regard it as such, and this would result in the elaboration of the forms of the reptile, that it might be more real. The natural and the artificial features must all have been related to one and the same conception. The point of naked rock was probably at first and always recognized as the head of both the natural and artificial body. It was the Indian, the real head of the great serpent, Manito. Concerning the curious construction of the face of the cliff upon which Serpent Mound is erected, Professor Joshua Lindahl, Secretary and Curator of the Cincinnati Society of Natural History, has an interesting theory, which he put forth a year or two ago in a public address based on his own observations of the Serpent Mound. Dr. Lindahl says, "The construction of this work by some early human race was preceded by some thousands of years by the sculpturing of the precipice by natural agencies into a grotesque face. Professor Holmes describes this face as reptilian. To me it appeared more reminding of a human face. At all events, it is a face of so striking appearance that it must necessarily have aroused the wonder of the aborigines when they first came there, and that face must have first suggested to those people the idea of building the mound." Aborigines. The face was made by the same forces which excavated at the close of the glacial period, the river valley on one side and the ravine on the other side of the rock spur, on the top of which, in much later time, the mound was built. The strata of rock vary greatly in hardness, from compact limestone and the soft shale to clay, which will easily be washed away by rain where exposed. A little below the top is a stratum very much harder than those nearest above and below, and having resisted atmospheric action better than the others, it projects beyond them. The stratum forms the nose of the face. A few feet lower down is the chin, still harder than any of the other strata, hence projecting much more. Between this chin and the nose are a few feet of mostly moderate hard limestone, and among them is a thin layer, an inch or two, of clay, which is always washed out near the surface, leaving an opening at the extreme edge of the rock suggesting a mouth. Below the chin all strata are soft and have been considerably eroded. This face is formed from the 10 to 15 uppermost strata of the 100 feet high spur, the nose consisting of a stratum containing many big and small nodules, one of which forms a bump on the nose. Some of these nodules have dropped out, leaving empty gills. I saw one such pit, oval, big enough to make room for a watermelon, at the other side facing Brush Creek. What would be more natural for ignorant savages than to think that this face was carved by the Great Spirit, their great Manitou, as a warning to them that the spot was sacred? And what would then be more natural than that these people should use that spur of land for sacred rites and adorn it appropriately? There was the face. On the top of that they put an oval, the skull, now almost effaced, and back of this the body and the tail of the reptile, which to them was a symbol of the great Manitou. The skull I saw plainly. It is not raised like the parts restored by Putnam, but the grass has a different shade of green, indicating a different soil, on a spot with a sharply defined outline and perfectly symmetrical form, extending from near the edge of the precipice, where the soil has been washed away, and continued backward by two symmetrical curves corresponding to the curves of the so-called jaw of the snake, to which they, no doubt, were joined originally. Now let's get into construction of the Serpent Mound. The most scientific and satisfactory examination of the structure of the serpent was made by Professor Putnam, who carefully excavated sections of the serpent and made explorations in the adjacent ground and the nearby mounds. We quote from the interesting report of the professor. This portion of the hill was either leveled off to the clay before the oval work was made, or there was no black soil upon the hill at that time, as none was used in the construction of the embankment, nor left below it. The same is true of the serpent itself. Careful examination of several sections made through the oval of the serpent, as well as laying bare the edge along both sides of the embankments throughout, have shown that both parts of this earthwork are both outlined upon a smooth surface along the ridge of the hill. In some places, particularly at the western end of the oval, and where the serpent approached the steeper portions of the hill, the base was made with stones, as if to prevent it from being washed away by heavy rains. In other places, clay, often mixed with ashes, was used in making these outlines, and it is evident that the whole structure was most carefully planned and thoroughly built of lasting material. The geological formation of the hill shows first the ledge rock, upon which rests the decayed grayish rock forming the so-called marl of the region, the upper portion of which has by decomposition become a grayish clay. Over this lies the yellow clay of the region, filling in all irregularities, and varying in thickness from 1 to 6 feet. Upon this rests the dark soil of recent formation, from 5 inches to nearly 2 feet in thickness in different parts of the park. It is necessary to have this formation constantly in mind, as we must, to a certain extent, rely upon it in determining the antiquity of the works and the burial places. Upon removing the sod within the oval, the dark soil in the central portion was found to be nearly a foot in depth, where it must have formed after the oval work was built. How many centuries are required for the formation of a foot of vegetable mold we do not know. But here on the hard gray clay forming the floor of the oval was about the same depth of soil as on the level ground near the tail of the serpent, where it has been forming ever since vegetation began to grow on the spot. The same results were obtained on removing the soil from the triangular space between the serpent's jaws, and that there was about the same amount of soil on the embankment is shown by the fact that the several plowings had not disturbed the underlying clay of which the embankments were constructed. The accompanying section through the western end of the oval illustrates this point. Now we get into Professor Putnam's explorations. The investigations of Professors Putnam, Holmes, Moorhead, and others prove conclusively that the plateau immediately south of the serpent was the dwelling place of the prehistoric man. Burials, burnt places, ash beds, and similar evidences marked the sites of cemeteries or villages. In the graves about the unearthed hearths, or here and there in the ground, were found thousands of chips and flakes of flint, rough pieces of jasper, quartz, and other rocks, burnished implements, chisel-shaped and sharp-edged knives, spear points, arrowheads, chipped drills, and perforators, ornaments and implements made of bones of animals and birds, pieces of rude pottery and fragments of cooking and other utensils, bones of fish, turtles, birds, and remains of various animals used for food. All these articles showed beyond question there had been settlements of the ancient people. There was evidence of dwellings and burials of different times. 2 or 3 small mounds were found near the head of the Serpent. On the plateau level, just south of the Serpent, were ample evidences of very ancient habitations and burials. There were here several mounds, and one, the most conspicuous of all, just south of the park road, was a conical-shaped mound 9 feet high and 20 feet in diameter. This is the mound upon which the granite monument now stands. This mound was opened and found to have been erected undoubtedly as the monument to some important man, buried amid the unusual ceremonies and form of interment. As this was the most interesting and important burial discovered in the vicinity of the Serpent, and is typical of the many unusual interments of the mound builders, we give in full report of the exhumation by Professor Putnam. First, an area 70 by 71 feet in diameter was cleared of all the dark soil, and the clay was also removed for several inches in depth, making a clear level floor. 11 feet northwest of the center, a trench was dug, 14 inches deep, 2 feet wide, and 5 feet long, and filled with loose clay, in which were a few small stones and several broken bones of animals. On the south side, from 6 to 11 feet from the center, and from 1 to 5 feet apart, were 4 small holes in the clay, and 14 inches southeast of the center was another. Each contained stones of a few animals' bones or ashes. On the north side, from 2 to 6 feet from the center, were 4 more of these holes, in which were small stones and animal bones. These holes varied from a few inches to over a foot in depth, and from 2 feet to nearly 7 feet in diameter. Their position and the fact that each contains something intentionally placed in them shows they were made for a purpose. It was evident from their character that they were not places where posts had stood forming a part of a wooden structure. Over the cleared area, and of course covering all these holes in the trench, clay was placed, forming a level platform 18 inches high. In the central portion of this platform, covering a space of 30 by 31 feet in diameter, a fire had been kindled and kept burning until a bed of ashes a few inches in thickness was made, to which may have been added ashes brought from other places, perhaps in great part from the burnt area extended for nearly 100 feet north of the mound. In this ash bed were found many small bits of pottery, pieces of burnt bone, and many stone chips, several broken stone implements, and about a dozen perfect ones. Also pieces of the shells of freshwater clams, all of which is suggestive of scraping up ashes from various hearths and depositing all upon the heap. That a large part of the ashes were made on the spot was evident from the burnt clay below, and from the several continuous masses of charcoal, the remains of logs from 2 to 4 inches in diameter. When the ceremony was finished, and enough ashes for the desired purpose had been obtained, the body of an adult man nearly 6 feet tall was placed, with the head to the east at full length, upon the hot ashes, and at once covered with clay, smothering the still smoldering logs in changing the embers to charcoal. Objects of a lasting nature do not seem to have been placed with the body unless some of the chipped flint points were found near it, and the ashes may be so considered. It may be asked if this was not an unsuccessful case of cremation, but I think that question may be answered in the negative. For while cremation was often practiced, as I have found on other occasions, it was by different methods, and the ashes and calcined bones were afterwards gathered up for burial, or buried in a peculiar manner of the place of burning. This skeleton was that of a well-developed man of ordinary size. The skull was crushed by the weight of the earth above. After the immediate covering of the body with clay, the mound was raised, a symmetrical, conical heap of clay to the height of 10 to 12 feet. Sometime subsequent to the building of the mound, and after the clay had been settled into a compact mass, graves were dug upon its sides and top, and 9 burials had taken place. Some of the intrusive graves were so near the surface that in plowing over the mound, the bones had been disturbed, while others were much deeper. One skeleton was found on the eastern side of the mound, and 4 feet from the exterior, at a greater depth from the top of the mound, another skeleton was found. These skeletons were extended in different directions. Woodchucks had made their burrows in one part of the mound, and had thrown out portions of a skull and other parts of a skeleton, among the bones of which the woodchucks had made their nest. The bones in most of these graves, especially when near the surface of the mound, were much decayed, and only fragments of the skeleton could be traced. In one instance only was anything found with the skeleton, and that was a fine stone hatchet resting with its edge outward on the bones of the left forearm, as if the handle had been placed along the arm and held in the hand. In the exploration of this mound, many stone implements were found, principally near the bottom on a level with the ash bed. Among the objects of special interest found in or near the ash bed of the first burial were a hemisphere of hematite, a plummet-shaped instrument, a small hatchet, and several perfect points chipped from flint, also 2 finely finished and polished stone axes with straight backs and grooves around them for holding the ribs by which they were fastened to handles. There was also found near the edge of the ashes of this burial a plate of copper 9.5 inches long and 3.5 inches wide, and 1/8 to nearly 1/4 of an inch thick, unquestionably hammered out of native copper. Several hundred feet southwest of the monument mound was a small mound, which upon exploration was found to contain, according to Professor Putnam, the first burials which had an antiquity as great as that of the serpent itself. And we have every reason to believe that the bodies buried at this spot were of the people who worshipped at the serpent's shrine. Professor Putnam thus describes the contents of this mound. On the clay of the knoll, a number of large stones had been placed, and over these had been raised a small mound, oblong in shape, and probably not over 2 or 3 feet high. In leveling the mound and plowing over the spot of many of these stones had been turned out and thrown down the hill, but a few still remained near which we started a preliminary trench. About a foot below the natural surface of the clay we found other stones, irregularly placed over an area about 7 feet long east and west, and 4 feet wide north and south, resting upon a bed of ashes nearly a foot thick. And under this ash bed were 3 more irregular groups, which proved to be graves, one under the eastern corner of the ash bed, one under the southeastern, and one under the northwestern portion. In each of these graves were the remains of human skeletons, lying in the clay and covered with ashes containing considerable charcoal. And here again, below these graves, were half a dozen builders, from 1 to 2 feet in diameter, and around them the edges of other stones, some of which were rounded boulders, and others pieces of ledge rock about 4 inches thick and a foot or 2 long, which marked another grave 7 feet long and 2 feet wide. Here, too, were found the remains of a skeleton, resting upon flat stones. This grave, of course, contained the first burial of the 4 that had taken place at this spot, and was made 2 feet below the bottom of the uppermost layer of stone, covering all the graves. The great weight from above had crushed the skull and other portions of the skeleton, and the fragments were firmly embedded in the hard, yellow clay, which had silted into the grave, mixed with the ashes which had been thrown over the body. This mass has become so hard and compact that it seemed more likely taking fossils from a plain rock than human bones from a grave. The clay immediately under the bottom stone was filled with bog iron, which had been deposited by water percolating among the stone, and the iron had also penetrated the bones. Several rude flint implements and flint flakes were found in the grave. Fragments of bone in all the graves show that all 4 skeletons were those of fully grown persons, and probably all men. With the knowledge obtained from the exploration of thousands of graves, under many and varied conditions of burial in various parts of the country, during nearly a quarter of a century of active field work, I am able to state that all the conditions relating to these graves are confirmatory of their great antiquity. Indeed, I have seldom found more conclusive comparative evidence of antiquity of graves than in those now under consideration. Professor Putnam, corroborated by other scholarly and trustworthy authorities, establishing the great age of these burials in deep sunken earth sites, or fireplaces by their relative placement, in which strata of the various clays and the subsequent coverings of other soils and vegetation deposits and layers, the formation of which must have been nature. The slow work of nature requiring centuries of time to thus cast its coverings over the artificial work of ancient man. The mound builder's works are very ancient, is proven in many ways by the testimony of the primitive articles and implements found in the mounds and graves, by the testimony of the creeks and rivers and the changes of their courses since the mounds were built, and by the great trees that have grown upon these mounds, some of them being 600 years old and probably second or third growths. Scholars conclude that these great works are at least hundreds of years old, and perhaps many thousands. It is plausibly guessed that these people belong to the Stone Age, for their implements are almost entirely of that material that had been learned the value of use of iron or other metal articles. The antiquity of the mound builder is further determined by the objects unearthed and the evident result upon them of chemical and geological forces of nature. Professor Putnam, in the Century magazine for April 1890, from which we have copiously quoted, has described with great clearness and detail the result of his investigations at Serpent Mound. His careful, scientific, and unimaginative conclusions seem to clearly demonstrate that the Serpent Mound was the work of most ancient people, populous, energetic, prompted by religious motives, and given to ceremonies of great exactness and elaboration. But still the real purpose of the serpent is no nearer solution than before. The unknown must become known, the professor exclaimed. But the knowledge still lies buried deeper than any prehistoric man, In the very depths of the unknown, the great serpent still holds with his coils the secret of his existence, as silent and impenetrable as the midnight hush of his solidarity abode on the mountainside far above the plains and valleys. It is most interesting, and indeed in many respects informing, if not altogether satisfactory, and certainly not conclusive, to consider the theories concerning the purpose and significance of the Serpent Mound. It is unquestionably to be classed with what are known as effigy mounds. Thank you all for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe, and you all have a good day.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.